You're in a conversation, you're explaining yourself clearly, calmly, maybe even confidently, and the other person just doesn't really respond. They move on, they talk over you, or they nod and then immediately ask someone else the same question. You walked away thinking, what just happened? And the default answer you've probably been given is, be more confident, speak up more, take up space. But here's the thing, confidence isn't the problem. In fact, some of the most confident people you've met are also some of the least respected. And some of the quietest, calmest people in a room hold it completely. So if it's not confidence, what is it? That's what this video is about. By the end, you're going to understand the actual mechanics of how respect is formed and the specific behaviors you might be doing right now that are quietly undermining it. Not because you're broken, but because nobody ever explained this clearly. Let's get into it. Here's the first thing you need to understand. Confidence is internal. It's what you feel about yourself. Respect is external. It's what other people conclude about you based on what they observe. These are two completely different things, and treating them as the same is where most people go wrong. Respect is a social evaluation. It's your brain and everyone else's brain constantly running a background process. Where does this person sit? How much weight should I give them? Are they worth my full attention? You're not consciously aware you're doing this. Neither are they. But it's happening in every interaction you have. And the inputs to that evaluation, they're not about how confident you feel inside. They're about signals, behavior, patterns, what you tolerate, what you demonstrate, what you control, which means, and this is important, you could feel completely confident and still be giving off signals that tell other people's brains, don't take this person seriously. That's a problem, but it's also fixable because signals are behaviors, and behaviors can change. Before I explain what low status signals are, I want you to sit with this for a second. Think about someone you instinctively respect. You might not even know why. You just give them your attention. You take their words seriously. When they speak, you listen. Now think about someone you don't quite respect in the same way. Again, no obvious reason. You're not unkind to them, but you don't quite treat them the same. What's the difference? A big part of it comes down to something evolutionary psychologists call status signals, the micro behaviors we emit that tell other people how much social value we believe we have. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. You're probably emitting low status signals every day, not because you're insecure, but because they've become habits, default patterns, things you do when you're nervous, when you want to be liked, when you're trying to make things smooth. Things like over-explaining yourself, going into way more detail than anyone asked for, as if you need to justify your existence in the conversation, filling silences too quickly. The moment there's a pause, you rush to fill it with words, with laughter, with anything, because silence feels dangerous. Seeking small approvals, ending statements with, you know, or does that make sense? Or am I right? Over and over, constantly checking whether the other person is okay with you. Nervous laughter, laughing at things that aren't funny because you want to seem easygoing, or laughing off a comment that actually bothered you. Each of these seems harmless in isolation, but together they broadcast a signal. I am not sure I belong here. I am trying to earn your approval. And people's brains, without any conscious decision, register that. And quietly, they adjust how much weight they give you. The fix is not to be cold, it's not to be rude, it's to stop performing approval seeking. Pause before you respond. Let the silence sit for a moment. It signals that you're not anxious. Stop over-explaining. Say the thing, then stop. Let it land. The less you work to be liked, ironically, the more you are. This is the one most people find hardest to hear. But stick with me, because understanding this actually gives you more power, not less. There's a principle in behavioral psychology called operant conditioning. In simple terms, behaviors that aren't challenged tend to continue. If you don't signal that something is not okay, the other person's brain doesn't learn that it's not okay. You've trained people how to treat you, not intentionally, not because you're weak, but every time someone interrupted you and you just kept talking like it didn't happen, you taught them, interrupting me is fine. Every time someone made a comment that belittled you and you laughed it off, you taught them jokes at my expense are welcome. Every time someone canceled on you last minute and you said, no worries, it's fine, without any consequence, you taught them, my time isn't something that needs to be protected. Over time, these interactions stack, and the person who keeps tolerating starts to be perceived as someone who can be tolerated. Now, here's the nuance that most advice misses. You don't fix this by suddenly becoming aggressive. You don't start overreacting or making scenes. That actually damages respect in a different way. What you do instead is simply register the disrespect, calmly, clearly. Someone talks over you, you pause and then you say, let me finish that thought. Not loudly, not angrily, just matter-of-factly. Someone makes a dismissive joke. You don't laugh. You look at them for a moment, say, interesting, and move on. No aggression, no speech, just a quiet refusal to validate it. That's it. That's the whole move. The calm response that says, this is where my line is. That's what changes the dynamic. This one hits differently when you're someone who prides yourself on being reliable, on being there for people, on being a good friend, a good colleague, a good partner. So let me be careful here, because this isn't about being cold or unavailable. It's about understanding how the human brain assigns value. Behavioral economics calls this the scarcity principle. We instinctively value what is less accessible. We take for granted what is always there. This isn't a character flaw. It's just how human perception works. When you are always immediately available, always reply within seconds, always drop your plans, always rearrange yourself to accommodate someone, you remove all sense of scarcity around your time and attention. And gradually, without anyone deciding this consciously, your time stops feeling valuable. Think about it. The friend who's always free, always picks up, always says yes. You might love them, but you probably don't think twice before canceling on them. The colleague, who always has time, you probably don't prep before speaking to them the way you would with someone who has a full calendar. None of this is fair, but it's real. So the shift is this. Start treating your time like something worth protecting. Not fake busy, not games, just genuine boundaries around your availability. You don't respond to every message immediately, not because you're playing it cool, but because you have a life happening. You don't rearrange yourself at the last minute without a good reason. You have standing plans, commitments, things you prioritize. When people sense that accessing you requires some consideration, they start giving your attention more consideration in return. Here's something that happens in every social interaction. Most people just don't have a name for it. Every conversation has a frame, an invisible structure that shapes how the interaction unfolds. Who sets the tone? Who defines what's normal? Who leads? And who follows? And the person who holds the frame is, almost always, the person who earns respect. This is subtle. It doesn't mean being dominant or loud. It means staying oriented, calm, and consistent, especially under pressure. Low frame looks like this. Someone makes a sarcastic comment about you, and you immediately get flustered. You start defending yourself. You laugh nervously. You try to explain. You've reacted to their frame. You've entered their version of the conversation. High frame looks like this. Same comment. You pause. You let it sit. You respond calmly without rushing. Maybe you address it briefly. Maybe you simply redirect. Anyway, what were you saying before? You're not rattled. You're not performing. You're just grounded. That groundedness is deeply attractive to the human brain because it signals this person is not easy to destabilize. This person has a settled sense of who they are, and settled people get respected. The practice here is simple but genuinely difficult. Learn to pause before you respond. When something throws you, resist the urge to immediately react. Take a breath. Choose your response rather than being dragged into one. You don't have to win every exchange. You just have to stay centered in your own. This is where most self-improvement people get stuck. Because the instinct, when you want people to take you seriously, it is to explain your value, to tell people what you know, to prove your competence verbally, but that's not how respect is actually built. There's a well-documented bias in social psychology sometimes called show over tell. People's brains weight observed evidence far more heavily than verbal claims, which means the more you explain how smart or capable or trustworthy you are, the less people actually believe it. Have you ever met someone who spends a lot of time telling you how experienced they are, how good they are at their job, how much they've achieved? Compare that to someone who just does things. Who gives a single precise answer? Who knows when to stop talking? Who demonstrates competence rather than announcing it? Who do you trust more? The concrete shift here. Stop narrating your value. Show it. In a meeting, don't explain what you're about to say before you say it. Just say it. Don't preface your ideas with, I don't know if this is right, but just offer the idea. Don't stay on a point for 5 minutes when 2 sentences would do. Every time you say less and land more, respect quietly increases. A sentence worth practicing. Here's what I'd suggest. Full stop. No qualifications. No pre-apologies. No lengthy justification. Just the thought. Let it sit. Here's a less obvious one, but it might be the most important. Respect is heavily tied to predictability, not in terms of being boring, but in terms of being consistent. Having a clear sense of what you stand for, knowing what you'll say yes to and what you'll say no to. Inconsistent people are difficult to trust, not because they're bad, but because the brain can't form a stable model of them, and we tend to grant less weight to people we can't quite pin down. This happens when you change your opinion based on the room, when you adjust your position depending on who you're with, when you laugh at a joke that privately offended you or agree with something you actually think is wrong, just to keep things easy. Over time, this creates a subtle erosion. People stop knowing where you actually stand, and when they can't tell where you stand, they stop really checking. Having a clear identity doesn't mean being rigid. It means knowing what matters to you, and being willing to signal that, calmly, without drama, even when it's slightly uncomfortable. A simple version of this: next time you disagree with something, say so. Not aggressively, just clearly. I actually think it's more like it. Then let the conversation proceed. You'll notice something. People don't respect you less. Often they respect you more. Okay. So let's make this concrete. You don't need to overhaul your personality. You don't need to become someone else. You need to make a few small behavioral shifts and then actually try them. Shift 1. Stop over-explaining. This week, every time you make a point, cut your explanation in half. Say the thing. Stop. Let the other person respond. Notice the difference in how the interaction feels. Shift 2. Register one thing calmly. At some point this week, something will happen that you'd normally let slide. An interruption, a dismissive comment, something that slightly irks you. Instead of laughing it off, pause, respond calmly. I'd like to finish that thought. Or even just don't laugh when it isn't funny. That pause is enough. Shift 3. Protect 1 unit of your time. This week, let one message sit unanswered for a little longer than usual. Decline one request that isn't a priority without over-explaining why. Not a game. Just practice treating your time like it has value. Shift 4. Practice the sentence. Here's what I'd suggest. Or, I actually see it differently. Use either one in a real conversation without qualification. Notice how it lands. These are small experiments. You're not changing who you are. You're just adjusting the signals. Here's the thing I want you to walk away with. Respect isn't something you can ask for. You can't convince someone to respect you. You can't explain your way into it or apologize your way back to it. Respect is something you signal through how you hold yourself, through what you tolerate, through how consistently you show up as someone who knows their own value. Not because you're performing it, but because you've quietly decided it. The behaviors we talked about today aren't manipulation tactics. They're not ways to dominate people or win games. They're just corrections, adjustments that bring your external signals into alignment with the person you already are on the inside. Because here's what I suspect is true about you. You don't lack confidence. You have it. You just have a few habits that are broadcasting a different message. Fix the signals. The respect follows.